time, I'll introduce our third panelist, Dr. Reginald Archer. He is an associate professor of applied GIS in the Department of Agricultural and Environmental Sciences at Tennessee State University in Nashville, Tennessee. And he seeks to put TSU on everyone's map with his research and teachings in GIS, GIS science, and remote sensing. He applies these technologies to analyze spatial data and uses the science of where to conduct research in many different domains. He directs the Geospatial Research and Analysis Lab and also the GIS certificate program at TSU. He's engaging campus-wide activities to increase STEM participation and is a lifetime member of the National Society of Black Engineers and a TSU chapter advisor. You can finish reading his bio. I think I'll just let him give his presentation.
All right, thank you. And thank you for having me. I just want to add to the bio, I'm also a husband and father, and my wife and daughter are the reason I'm here. Not because I needed to get away from them, but because they support me. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, I'm just going to really echo a lot of what we heard already, and from a perspective that I am directly involved in. So let's get started. I'm sure since we're at Esri, I'm sure you all are familiar with this. And we talk about this in GIS and mapping and location technologies and location intelligence and these types of things. You know, visibility is one of the things that we want to provide with our maps and visualizations and those types of things. So we know that location is everything. But when we watch the video and the commercial about Esri and the products, we often hear terms like relationships, patterns, and connections. So I'm going to try to talk about those things in terms of inclusion. And of course, we can see what others can't. So GIS helps us see what others can't. Mapping helps us to do that. But we still can't see very many Blacks, people of color in the industry, right? So how can we use this, the technology, but also the mapping and how we approach the mapping in terms of the ethics and principles to include those marginalized groups? And so visibility improves opportunity for women, minorities alike, et cetera, to strive for these careers in this industry. So, so hopefully I get to talk about that, or hopefully I get to bring that across to you all and encourage and improve participation in geospatial intelligence, GIS, location intelligence, spatial thinking, et cetera, et cetera. And really it's about connecting people and those experiences as you've heard from the prior speakers. So what does a geographer look like? Right? And some of you may have seen some of these types of slides before that show these images. Well, when we talk about visibility and what people see and what is encouraging or what may not be encouraging or discouraging is the image, right? We're about visualization. So when we Google search, you know, what does a geographer look like? This is what we might see. What does a geologist look like? This is what we might see. What does a cartographer look like? Right? I think you guys get the picture. There isn't a picture of some of us, even some of us in this room. And this is not everything, but this is the first thing that pops up. And so when we talk about being inclusive, then a lot of these images don't necessarily seem like they are inclusive. Although GIS analysts, a lot more youth in these images compared to geologists and others. But what we don't want is we don't want the industry to end up like this, where you have a flyer like this saying we're having a talk about women in math, and here are all the speakers. And there are all kinds of things we could take from a flyer like this, but we don't want our industry to be represented in this way. So one of the approaches that I'd like to present is, or to talk about, I want to talk about the underrepresentation, and we know this. This is in geosciences broadly, not just in geography or cartography and geology and so on and so forth. But you know, there's been little to no significant progress over the last 40+ years, according to research And so how can we become more inclusive? So I'm going to talk about inclusion of the mapped, right? We talk about, and I'll talk about that in a second, but you've heard that already. And also inclusion, I'm a little biased because I'm at an HBCU, Historically Black College University at Tennessee State University. So I'll talk about that, but I think even in a broader scope, all minority serving institutions and being inclusive, and then inclusion of diverse voices and perspectives. Again, these are things that we've heard, so I'm echoing some of these things. So as you all know, or should know, this is kind of common knowledge in these spaces that this human era of GIS began when we started looking at maps from above or satellite images, aerial images, and when people were able to actually, the general public was actually able to access these maps and look down. Where do people want to do? They want to look at their homes. They situate themselves in the map in a sense, right? So sometimes, even in this sense, some communities are still left out, say digital divide and so on and so forth, but some communities are still left out. But this is important. People immediately zoomed in to see where they were in the world. And so this allowed us to see particular communities. So we need to engage those communities. We need to engage, as you've heard, and again, I'm echoing this, but we need to connect with the communities and engage those communities that we are investigating. And one of the things that I noticed as I looked through some of the various codes and principles and guidelines and on different websites, and these are just a couple of them, GIS Code of Ethics, Ethics and Mapping, here Esri, and the Locust Charter, and there are many of these, and throughout this conference, I'm sure you'll hear about these. There's a lot of focus on the mapper and the map user, but not so much on the mapped. So this is what I mean when I talk about inclusion of the mapped. So we do talk about protection, maybe identity and some things that are personal, sensitive content and those kinds of things. And there are a few lines, striving for broad citizen involvement and stuff like that. But I think there should be more. And maybe one of the ways we do that is by engaging some of those communities in developing some codes around the maps that will be used that represent those communities, with those communities. So that's one of the ways that we can do this. And this also empowers people to situate themselves in the maps that are being used to represent them. So we can do that through participatory mapping, a little bit different from citizen science, but engaging the community in participating in the maps. One of the projects I'm working on right now is with the Communities for a Better Environment in Los Angeles, California. Last week I did a workshop to show them some of the tools, how to use the tools so that they can create the maps themselves to help them with their with issues that are going on in their environments around environmental justice. So, and people have been talking about this for a while. And who owns the data and who should be mapping the data, and are these digital maps useful for different communities? So these are still questions that have to be answered. Another project that I'm working on, I talked about the HBCUs and inclusion of the HBCUs. Now, I'll speed up a little bit here. This is a project that I'm working on to look at how can we connect not just so one of the things we talk about in terms of broadening pathways is reaching students in middle school, high school, at a much younger age, so they don't get to college and finally learn, oh, look at this mapping technology that I can get involved in, to get them at a younger age. Except we find that the teachers don't know the science. A lot of times we have, at HBCUs, we produce a lot of the teachers that serve African-American communities. And so we want to be able to put the science in the hands of those teachers that are coming out of these institutions, but we don't have a lot of these programs at HBCUs. So this project did a deep dive. This is supported by the National Science Foundation. We did a deep dive just to see where were the geosciences more broadly, environmental sciences, geography, physical geography, GIS at HBCUs versus where the education programs were, and tried to connect with all of these institutions to figure out how can we connect the education programs and those geoscience programs. And so part of this is developing a map that the institutions or people interested in those institutions can go to and determine, okay, what's there, what are the opportunities for connections, collaborations, and those types of things. So these indicate these intersections. So we know that we can be inclusive, and this could be an inclusive approach to getting K-12 involved, especially where we're producing a lot of the teachers. Inclusion of diverse perspectives and voices, of course, we've heard about these already. We perform these environmental assessments and these types of things, and we study global environmental systems, but we're not always including communities that are impacted by these. So it's not just consider how you can be more inclusive in the mapping, but why? We know when we think about ethics, we hear things like do no harm. But why is this important? So we should be doing culturally relevant mapping. We should include the stories and the experiences, the indigenous knowledge, the wisdom, not just what we hear or not just what we discover in our research, but are we including those voices to really help us to interpret what we're actually seeing in the map? And again, this allows people to situate themselves in the map. A lot of times maps ignore the historical context of Black neighborhoods, white flight, indigenous communities, those types of things. These should not be ignored. Right? There's a reason why we can look at a map and say, wow, look at that. Well, one of the questions we ask in mapping is, yeah, this is what is here, but how to get there? Where's it going? Why is it there? Et cetera, et cetera. So these are the kinds of things we should think about. So quickly breeze through these next few slides. Again, encourage and improve participation in GIS and location intelligence fields. Include cohorts of students. When we're thinking about working with students, don't just grab one, grab two. Talk about being welcome and feeling safe in an environment, then it's a lot easier to do that when you are welcome as a group, as opposed to just an individual and trying to appease or figure out, how can we make this connection? A lot of times that doesn't work, but with a cohort of people, then it's a lot more useful. And include those cross, multidisciplinary, culturally relevant ideas, right? I'm going to mention this and continue to mention the culturally relevant because that's important, and I'll probably talk about that when I'm sitting on the panel, but include the communities. Inclusive mapping is reimagine how you apply the science and think about who science is for. One of the things that we think about when we're working within communities is, do we just use the community as a backdrop for, displaying what we can do with the science, or are they actually benefiting from what we do? And do we ask them, do you need this? Would you like to be part of this? Don't operate in silos, of course, collaborate, connect, strengthen those mentor-mentee relationships, communicate the science, be present and engage. So I'll end here with this quote from Congressman Troy Carter of Louisiana: "Don't attempt to do for us without us." And I think that's the key point of inclusion. And of course, can't leave without saying I'm at Tennessee State University. We are looking for students, so grab that. Thank you.
Thank you, Reginald.